it's never too early to look ahead to next football season, is it? And on Tuesday, the Big 12 gave us a big reason to do so. The release of the 2025 schedules. The Utes schedule starts off with an old Pac-12 matchup, a road game at the Rose Bowl against UCLA, and then they open up at Big 12 play at home against Texas Tech. In September, the Utes also have some favorable bye weeks early in October and early in November. Their toughest stretch, though, Arizona State and Colorado sandwiched around the BYU game down in Provo. As for the Cougars, well, their bye week comes at an unfavorable time already in week 3. That feels a bit too early, doesn't it? Then a brutal 6-game stretch with 4 road games, and one of the 2 home games is Utah. They open the November schedule with a road game against Texas Tech, who will be one of the favorites to win the league after a game in Ames against another contender in Iowa State.
The Big 12 released the 2025 schedules. Now BYU and Utah fans can make plans for what should be a wild season of football this fall. Joining us to take a deeper dive into the schedule is our BYU sports insider, Mitch Harper, and Utah sports insider, Steve Bartle. You can read, watch, and listen to all of their outstanding work and coverage on KSLSports.com. All right, guys, we have to start with the obvious, right? I mean, everyone's looking at the schedules like, when's the BYU-Utah game? We now know when it is.
Right.
But it's not a time that we all expected. What do you think about playing in mid-October?
I think that it was surprising to see that date, October 18th, because I think a lot of coaches, Kalani Sitake felt it was going to be probably the end of the season, like many of us did. But I'm okay with it because history's shown that, this game hasn't been played at the end of the year in the last 15 years. But the problem is that the Big 12 is not owning a weekend for this historic great game. This is your best game. Own a certain weekend and plant the flag that this is the weekend when BYU and Utah will be played annually. That, to me, is the issue because it's getting tossed around like it's just a meaningless game.
You see it the same way?
Yeah, a little bit. I think I see why there's value in placing it somewhere not in rivalry week, right? Because what comes after rivalry week? Championship week. And with Utah hoping to get back to championship contending status, BYU being perceived and going to be one of the top contenders in the Big 12 this year, knowing the toll that game takes on these guys, on these players, on this team, or on these teams, I think I appreciate why they wouldn't want to have that game that final weekend of the regular season. It is definitely a shock to the system not to have it because we're so used to that game, especially in conference play, being the final game of the year. But I think I see the value in not having it there.
I think there's little doubt that is the premier rivalry in the conference, especially after what they did last year, right? All right, let's take a little broader look at the schedule. Steve, we'll start with you. Just your overall thoughts when you see Utah's schedule.
Yeah, pretty fair schedule. I think with where the buys have come in week 6 and week 11, I think it sets up really nicely for Utah. The month of October, they're not going to have to leave the state. They do have to travel 50 miles south, so a tough road game, we know, going down to Provo. But outside of that, this schedule, I think, sets up really nicely for Utah to first build some momentum early on in the season, hopefully contend having that momentum in the month of October during their toughest stretch, and then finishing the year with 3 games. I think it sets up really nicely for them to build and maintain some momentum.
What stood out to you, Mitch?
Coming into the schedule release, I looked at BYU as the favorite in the Big 12 conference going into next year. Now I would say maybe I'm lowering the expectations because I think the Big 12 stacked up a difficult slate for BYU logistics-wise. Opponents, we know this league can be a perceived bottom feeder, and they can rise to the top. The issue is that some of the logistics of this schedule are built in no matter what the strength of the opponents are. When you look at you have a bye in week 3, that's way too early. It's the earliest bye week since 2013 for BYU. And a little bit of that is due to Tom Homo keeping the East Carolina game. That was self-inflicted by BYU to keep East Carolina on the non-conference schedule. 2 Eastern time zone games, no byes the following week. The Utah game, no bye before, no bye after, and the week after, to Steve's point earlier about how draining that game can be, you go at Iowa State, who's going to be probably a preseason top 4 team, won 11 games last year. So I think some of the logistics are very difficult with this schedule. You've got 6 straight weeks where you only have two home games. It's a difficult slate. The Big 12 did no favors for BYU.
Let's continue looking at some of the challenges, Steve. What's the toughest road game for Utah? Or maybe what's the most important game for Utah on the schedule that you point to, say, that is a game that can make or break their season if they win that game.
Yeah, I think the most important game for Utah is the conference opener against Texas Tech, because that kind of sets the tone for them the rest of the year. There are going to be much more difficult games. Texas Tech is going to be pretty formidable this season, I believe, with what Joey McGuire has done there with the Red Raiders. I think if Utah can get that win to kind of build that early momentum in conference play, that'll help them moving forward into that next phase of the schedule that I was talking about in October. So I think, for Utah, you need to kind of find wins that will help kind of ignite some excitement again, right? That's what this fan base needs for Utah. They need that excitement, and I think getting a win over the Red Raiders would do that. I think that's the most important game for Utah on that schedule.
Mitch, you dug into some of the challenges of BYU's schedule, but what is that one road game, that one road test, or maybe that crucial game in the season that could really help make or break their season?
Week 5 at Colorado is going to be a big one too. It's a Big 12 opener for BYU, and I really would have liked to have seen that game be Week 3. Colorado had an opening there too. Colorado ends up getting Houston on the road. They host BYU in Week 5. It's going to be a bit of a revenge game for the Buffs because BYU dominated Colorado 36-14 in that Alamo Bowl game, and I think that's just going to be a great opportunity for BYU. There's going to probably be a lot of eyeballs on that game, and from a national narrative perspective, we saw the impact of playing the Buffs, what it did for BYU at season's end. I think that can be a similar impact because I think Colorado will probably be at worst 2-2, 3-1. They're going to be a huge draw. That could help BYU from a narrative perspective as they navigate what will be a tough Big 12 road.
Is it way too early to have a way too early prediction on your win-losses already? Do you guys look at that already?
I've got BYU going 10-2.
Okay.
I think BYU could be 10-2 with this schedule, and this is the best BYU team that Kalani's assembled.
Wow.
The talent, the depth, a lot of it's going to hinge on Jake Retzlaff, though. Can Jake Retzlaff become what Zach Wilson was in 2020, where you're talking 30-plus touchdowns, single-digit interceptions? You've got to take care of the football. I think a lot of it hinges on him. And if he takes another leap forward, BYU is going to be in the conversation in November again, and maybe they just need a few tiebreakers to go their way this time. But they'll be in the mix. They got to stay healthy, too. That's going to be critical. But they've got depth, too, to navigate injuries as well. But Retzlaff is key, and he's got to stay healthy because there's questions about the depth at quarterback. Yeah,
there's a lot for Utah to sort out on the offense side of the ball, but they return a good portion of their defense. A lot of guys had to step up this past season due to the injuries. I think that's going to be the focal point of Utah's outlook next year. How much can Devin Dampier come in and just kind of pick up where he left off this past season under Jason Beck at New Mexico? I think I've looked at the schedule, and just with the way the schedule sets up, it's a really nice schedule for them. Best case scenario, they go 10-2, but that's pretty optimistic. That's everything clicking and that sort of stuff. But they don't have the scheduled losses like they did this past year with Arizona and TCU coming off bye weeks going into those games. Colorado is the only team that does that. I think I've settled on 8-4, 9-3 for Utah as the most likely best outcome. But there is a chance that if everything clicks, the offense is humming, 10-2 is certainly in the equation as well. But also, they could end up 7-5, 6-6, just the same.
We've seen BYU go from 5-7 to 10-2. So anything is possible in the Big 12. That's why it's so much fun. If Devin Dampier has 19 rushing touchdowns and can get up to 20 passing touchdowns, then Utah looks completely different.
Yeah.
So many things could happen. But now we know the schedule. It's going to be fun. Guys, thanks so much. Steve Bartle, Mitch Harper, you know who these guys are. Read them on KSLSports.com.